I want you to take a look at the morning cup of coffee you might be, holding in your hand right now. Or if you're not drinking coffee, just picture it.
Yeah, just imagine that warm, familiar mug.
Right, exactly. It's this warm, earthy beverage. It's agricultural. I mean, it is as basic and ancient as human trade gets. But now, I want you to contrast that image in your mind with a dilution refrigerator in a quantum computing lab.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that is quite the leap.
Right. We're talking about a futuristic, multi-million-dollar machine operating at near absolute zero, processing data in ways that basically bend the laws of physics.
It's a massive juxtaposition because on one side of the spectrum, you have rural agriculture, soil management, traditional farming.
Yeah.
And then on the other side, you have literally the absolute bleeding edge of deep tech and material science.
And today, we actually have a source document that bridges that impossible gap. We are doing a deep dive into a patented breakthrough surrounding something called 3D biogenic graphene derived from coffee.
Which is just wild to even say out loud.
It really is. It's the brainchild of a Costa Rican innovator named Martin Gutierrez Guerrero and his company, Nova Amazonia. And the mission for our deep dive today is to understand how this innovation takes literal agricultural trash from coffee farms.
Unlike the discarded pruning wood, right?
Exactly, the dead branches. And it restructures it into this highly sought-after miracle material. So we're going to explore how this solves a critical environmental crisis, unlocks tech like brain-computer interfaces, and totally rewrites the economics of rural farming.
Yeah, whether you're a tech enthusiast, an environmentalist, or, just someone who loves a good latte, this is going to fundamentally flip the script on what you and I consider to be waste.
Totally.
Right.
So before we get into the coffee of it all, we kind of have to talk about traditional graphene.
Yeah.
Because it's been hyped for, 20 years now?
Ooh, easily 2 decades. It's been touted as a miracle material. I mean, structurally, it is a single two-dimensional layer of carbon atoms all arranged in this hexagonal lattice.
Like a microscopic honeycomb.
It's exactly like a honeycomb. And conceptually, it has unprecedented thermal and electrical conductivity. And it is exponentially stronger than steel.
Yet, I mean, it hasn't exactly taken over the world. We don't see it everywhere in our daily lives.
No, we really don't.
Yeah.
And our source details exactly why it has fundamentally failed to scale. And it starts with the physical mechanics.
Okay.
The first major issue is the scaling problem. When you try to produce traditional 2D graphene in large quantities, these nanometric sheets have a very strong tendency to just, clump together.
Oh, so they just stick to each other.
Yeah, because of the atomic forces at play, the flat sheets essentially try to stack back on top of each other, and they just revert right back into normal graphite.
So it works beautifully as a single layer under a microscope, but the second you try to make like a usable bucket of it, the sheets just stick together and become glorified pencil lead.
Exactly. You lose all the unique quantum properties, and that is just the physical barrier. The industrial barrier, which is the really fatal flaw here, is the energy and toxicity crisis involved in actually manufacturing it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. The standard industrial method to create high-quality graphene is called chemical vapor deposition, or CVD.
Right, CVD. Let's translate that a bit. What does that actually look like, on a factory floor?
Well, essentially, you're taking a carbon-rich gas, like methane, and you're trying to force the carbon atoms to separate from the hydrogen and deposit themselves onto a metal substrate in this perfect layer.
Sounds complicated.
It is, because to break those molecular bonds, you have to run vacuum reactors at extreme sustained temperatures.
How extreme are we talking?
Usually between 900 and 1100 degrees Celsius. The sheer electrical consumption to maintain that kind of heat at scale is just astronomical.
Which feels incredibly counterproductive. I mean, we are trying to build the material of the future to make things more efficient, but we're burning massive amounts of energy just to bake it.
And it gets significantly worse when you look at the alternative chemical route.
Wait, there's a worse way.
Oh, yeah. It's often called Hummer's method, and it's used to make graphene oxide. Instead of gases and heat, this method uses brute chemical force to literally peel the layers of graphite apart.
Okay, that sounds messy.
Extremely. It requires intensive use of highly toxic strong acids. We're talking sulfuric acid, nitric acid, potassium permanganate.
Wow.
And once you force the layers apart with all that, you have to wash the acid away to get the final product.
I'm guessing you can't just rinse that down the drain.
No. Absolutely not. You have to use industrial volumes of ultra-pure water to neutralize it. And the result is millions of liters of highly toxic chemical runoff.
So you're dealing with a process that constantly threatens local groundwater and aquifers.
Exactly. And beyond the environmental damage, the source mentions a pretty severe human element here, too.
Right, the worker safety stuff.
Yeah. Traditional 2D graphene dust creates these free, volatile nanoparticles. It's a major industrial safety issue.
Because it just floats in the air.
Right, because it's essentially a microscopic, two-dimensional flake.
Yeah.
It floats easily. And if a factory worker inhales this dust, those nanoparticles are small enough and sharp enough to physically slip past cellular membranes.
Oh, God.
And then they embed themselves right in the lung tissue. Once there, they cause chronic oxidative stress, severe inflammatory responses.
It's basically shredding your lungs on a microscopic level.
Exactly. The source actually draws a direct medical comparison between this lung damage and asbestosis.
Okay, let's unpack this. Traditional graphene is incredibly expensive to heat. It requires poisoning the groundwater with sulfuric acid to wash it, and if you breathe it in, it acts like microscopic razor blades in your lungs, similar to asbestos.
It's a horrifying resume for a miracle material.
It really is. But this is where the 3D biogenic graphene, the 3D BioG from Costa Rica, completely changes the game. I actually want to try an analogy here to visualize the physical difference. It sounds to me like traditional 2D graphene is like loose fiberglass. It's an incredible material, but if it's floating in the air as dust, it's an absolute nightmare to breathe.
That's a great way to look at it, yeah.
But this 3D biogenic graphene is like a solid piece of scaffolding. Because it's pre-built into a continuous porous network, there's no dangerous volatile dust floating around.
That is a highly accurate visualization. Because the 3D biogenic graphene self-assembles into a continuous macroscopic scaffold, you can actually just hold it in your hand.
That's amazing.
It is structurally intact, which means it is inherently safe to handle physically.
But how are they managing to build a solid carbon scaffold out of a coffee plant without using all that extreme heat or toxic acid?
So they start with the pruning wood of the Arabica coffee plant.
Okay, the dead branches.
Right. Every year, coffee farmers prune their bushes to encourage new growth. And that leaves behind massive piles of what we call lignocellulosic biomass.
Which is just a fancy word for the woody skeleton of the plant.
Exactly. Nova Amazonia uses a process starting with hydrothermal carbonization, or HTC, and they follow that up with an optimized green pyrolysis.
Hydrothermal carbonization. That sounds like they're essentially pressure cooking the wood.
That is basically what happens, yeah. They use water and pressure to break down the biomass.
But wait, how do they avoid those 1100-degree temperatures you see in the standard CVD method?
That is the really clever part. The secret is hidden in the wood itself. The biomass of the coffee plant naturally contains organic catalysts, things like calcium and potassium, deeply embedded right in its cellular structure.
So the plant actually provides its own chemical shortcuts.
Yes, exactly. These built-in catalysts lower the activation energy required to reorganize the carbon atoms. The source refers to this as a low enthalpy process.
Meaning you don't have to blast it with heat.
Right. Because they don't have to force the reaction with sheer brute heat, the energy required drops drastically. We're talking energy savings of 50 to 70% per kilogram compared to traditional methods.
That's huge. And if they are using water to pressure cook this, how do they avoid the toxic runoff issue we saw with the chemical methods?
By entirely eliminating the use of strong acids. The biogenic route uses a closed-loop water system.
Ah, so they just recycle it.
Exactly. The water utilized in the hydrothermal reactors is continuously filtered, purified, and recirculated inside the system. Yeah. No toxic solvents are introduced, which means there is zero toxic leaching to threaten the local environment.
That's brilliant. So we arrive at a stable, structurally sound, non-toxic 3D version of graphene, and we made it from coffee farm clippings.
And because it's structured as this continuous scaffold, it isn't just a safer alternative, it actually becomes viable for the most cutting-edge technologies on Earth.
The structure itself is the feature.
Exactly.
Let's move out of the manufacturing plant and into the frontier of deep tech then, because I want to go back to that quantum computer we mentioned at the very beginning.
Oh, definitely. The cryostats and quantum labs are a perfect showcase for this material.
Cryostats being those massive cooling systems.
Right. Quantum processors have to operate at temperatures near absolute zero. We're talking millikelvin ranges, because the qubits that process the information are incredibly fragile.
Yes, any tiny fluctuation messes them up.
Exactly. Any stray heat or magnetic interference will just collapse the quantum state and ruin the calculation entirely.
So they need a material that can pull heat away from the processor without acting like a magnet.
which is exactly what the 3D coffee graphene does. It acts as an ultra-pure microthermal scaffold inside these systems. It efficiently dissipates the residual heat generated when the system is reading the qubits.
And it doesn't cause any magnetic noise.
None.
Yeah.
Because of its unique biogenic purity, it does this without generating any magnetic or structural interference at all.
It is so wild to think a piece of wood that used to grow on a humid Costa Rican hillside is now sitting in a vacuum at absolute zero, keeping a quantum computer stable.
It really is incredible.
And if it can manage heat that precisely, I imagine its electrical properties are just as interesting. The source mentions it's being used in neuromorphic computing, too.
Yes. So neuromorphic processors are essentially computer chips designed to mimic the neural structure and operation of the human brain.
Okay.
Instead of just passing electricity through a standard transistor that simply turns on and off, the 3D porous channels in this coffee-derived graphene allow for the controlled migration of ions.
Let me make sure I'm picturing this right. A standard computer chip is like a series of light switches, right? On or off, 0 or 1.
Right, binary.
But this 3D structure is more like a microscopic riverbed where you can finely control the flow and volume of the water passing through it.
That riverbed analogy is spot on.
Yeah.
By controlling the flow of ions through these microscopic channels, you can modulate the electrical conductance dynamically.
Okay, wow.
This makes the 3D graphene the fundamental base for manufacturing advanced memristors.
Memristors.
Yeah, they're components that remember their electrical state even when the power is turned off. They act as solid-state artificial synapses.
So it's literally learning.
Exactly. It allows the processor to adapt and process data simultaneously, using just a fraction of the energy of a normal chip, much like biological brain plasticity.
So this microscopic scaffolding organizes electrical flow, much like living tissue. Does that structural benefit translate to the macro scale too? Like if you take that scaffolding and put it into physical building materials, what happens?
The source actually outlines its application in urban construction, specifically when dosed into Portland cement.
Cement, from quantum computers to cement.
I know, it's a huge leap. But in this context, the 3D graphene acts as a catalytic nucleation agent.
Catalytic nucleation agent, meaning it acts like a seed that forces the cement to crystallize differently as it cures.
Yes, exactly. Because of its ultra-high surface area, it alters the molecular hydration process of the cement. It forces the crystals to form tighter, more integrated bonds.
And that makes it stronger.
Significantly. It increases the mechanical, compressive, and tensile strength of the concrete by up to 30%.
Wow. If the concrete is 30% stronger, you need significantly less of it to build, say, a skyscraper.
Right. And importantly, you'd need less clinker, which is the heavily polluting, kiln-fired part of cement production.
So less clinker means way fewer emissions.
You slash the carbon emissions of the construction project, and furthermore, the carbon contained within the graphene itself becomes permanently locked into the urban infrastructure.
You are effectively turning city skylines into permanent carbon sinks.
Exactly.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, though, because I want to push back on one of the applications listed in the source, specifically in neuromedicine.
I had a feeling you'd bring that up.
I mean, I can easily grasp putting this material into cement to make it stronger, or putting it into a quantum computer to manage heat. But the source explicitly states this is being used for brain-computer interfaces, BCIs, and as a treatment scaffold for Parkinson's disease.
Yes, it does.
I have to play devil's advocate here. How on earth does a charred coffee branch safely interact with living human brain tissue? It sounds inherently dangerous to introduce carbonized wood into the nervous system.
It does sound counterintuitive, but it all comes back to how the material was synthesized in the first place, because it's biogenic.
Derived purely from organic plant matter.
Exactly, without all those toxic chemical solvents used in Hummer's method. Because of that, it possesses zero cellular cytotoxicity, doesn't poison the cells.
Okay, so it's not toxic.
Yeah.
But it's still a foreign object in the brain.
Well, the true medical breakthrough lies in its physical geometry. We keep mentioning the 3D porous network, right?
Yeah.
Under a microscope, that network closely mimics the three-dimensional architecture of the human extracellular matrix.
The extracellular matrix, that's the natural protein scaffolding in our bodies that tells our cells where and how to grow, right?
You got it. Because the geometry is so remarkably similar, the human body doesn't recognize the coffee graphene as a foreign invader to be attacked and rejected.
Oh, wow. It thinks it's supposed to be there.
It recognizes a familiar structural scaffold. This allows it to serve as a highly sensitive, flexible, and durable active interface. It actually facilitates the regeneration of neuronal tissue.
That is mind-blowing.
And that allows for incredibly precise guided electrostimulation in patients with neurodegenerative diseases like Parkinson's.
The fact that the physical geometry of a coffee branch translates so perfectly to the architecture of the human nervous system is just fascinating.
Nature is incredibly efficient.
But having explored how this tech shapes the future of computing, cities, and medicine, we really have to trace this back down the supply chain. If you're listening to this and wondering how extracting this futuristic material actually impacts the people harvesting it, we need to look at the rural communities in Costa Rica.
Yeah, this is where the technological breakthrough triggers a massive socioeconomic and environmental paradigm shift.
How so?
Well, traditionally, the millions of tons of pruning waste generated by coffee farms are treated as an environmental liability. They just sit in landfills or rot in the damp fields.
Right, and as that wood undergoes anaerobic decomposition, it releases massive volumes of methane gas.
Which is a huge problem.
Yeah, methane is a brutally potent greenhouse gas. It traps heat far more effectively than carbon dioxide.
The source notes it's actually 28 times more destructive than CO2 over a 100-year time frame.
That's terrifying.
But by taking that waste and putting it through the Novi Amazonia process, the cycle becomes entirely carbon negative. The CO2 that the coffee plant naturally absorbed from the atmosphere while it was growing is intercepted before it can rot into methane.
So it's trapped.
Yes, it is permanently locked into that indestructible 3D graphene structure we've been talking about.
It's an immediate climate fix right at the farm level. But the source also talks about tech sovereignty, which implies, a geopolitical shift, not just an environmental one.
Right, because the traditional model of the global economy dictates that the global south exports cheap raw materials, like unroasted coffee beans or timber, to industrialized nations in the north or to China.
And then those countries process the raw materials into high-tech goods and sell them back at a massive premium.
Exactly. This project decentralizes that industrial power. It places high-tech biorefineries directly in rural coffee-producing regions.
So it interrupts the brain drain. I mean, instead of a young, educated person feeling forced to leave their farming town to find a specialized job in the capital city, the opportunity is brought right to them.
It creates highly qualified roles for chemists, materials engineers, and plant technicians right there in the rural environment. It integrates the local workforce directly into the deep tech economy.
So what does this all mean in practical terms? Because I have to be honest, it sounds slightly utopian. What is the actual math here? Does processing wood trimmings into high-tech materials really compete financially with just selling the coffee beans themselves? I mean, coffee is one of the most traded commodities on the planet.
The financial modeling provided in the source is arguably the most staggering part of the entire document. Let's actually do a step-by-step audit of exactly what happens to a single metric ton, 1,000 kilograms, of raw, wet coffee pruning waste.
Okay, let's do it. We start with 1,000 kilos of wet branches sitting on the farm.
First, that waste goes through the hydrothermal treatment we discussed. This essentially pressure cooks and dries it out, leaving about 450 to 500 kilograms of dry, lignin-rich biomass.
Right.
Then the HTC process continues, converting that into about 300 kilograms of nanoporous precursor carbon. Finally, it undergoes the green pyrolysis and molecular exfoliation.
Stripping away everything until we are left with just the final product. So what is the final yield?
You are left with a net yield of 120 to 150 kilograms of pure commercial-grade 3D biogenic graphene.
Okay, so roughly a 12 to 15% yield from the original wet trash. What is the market value of that?
Well, traditional graphene prices vary wildly based on purity. Bulk commercial graphene might hover around $100 to $200 per kilo, but high-purity quantum grades, the kind used in those dilution refrigerators, can exceed $100,000 per kilogram.
That is insane.
It is, but to ensure the financial model is grounded, the source uses an ultra-conservative baseline price of just $120 per kilogram for this 3D Bio-G.
Okay, let's run those conservative numbers then. If they get 120 kilos of graphene from the ton of waste sold at $120 a kilo, that is $14,400 in gross revenue from the graphene alone.
And we have to factor in the byproducts too.
Oh, right.
Because this process avoids massive methane emissions, it generates high-integrity carbon dioxide removal credits, which adds an estimated $120. Also, The organic material that doesn't fully convert into graphene becomes about 150 kilograms of highly porous activated biochar.
Which is an exceptional organic fertilizer.
It saves the farmers an estimated $60 in synthetic fertilizer costs while simultaneously regenerating the eroded soil on their farms. So when you add the graphene, the carbon credits, and the biochar savings together, the total gross value generated from one single ton of waste is $14,580.
Over $14,000 from a ton of literal garbage that farmers previously had to, pay someone to haul away or just let rot. How does that number compare to the actual coffee beans they spend all year growing?
This is where the economics completely flip. To generate that same $14,000, a farmer would have to cultivate, harvest, and sell 70 sacks of green export coffee.
Wait, really? 70 sacks of coffee to equal 1 ton of dead branches?
Exactly. By processing a single ton of pruning waste, a cooperative can duplicate the financial output of 70 sacks of coffee. And they do it without planting a single extra hectare of land or using extra water for irrigation.
Okay, I have to push back on the net profit, though. Gross revenue is great, but operating a high-tech biorefinery in a rural town can't be cheap. The operating expenses, the OPEX, have to eat into that $14,000 significantly.
You would think so, but remember the low enthalpy process we discussed.
The natural catalysts in the wood.
Right. Because the organic catalysts inside the wood drastically lower the energy required, the operational costs are slashed. The model calculates the OPEX, including electricity, local labor, logistics, and the depreciation of the reactors, at just $35 per kilogram of graphene produced.
Okay, so producing 120 kilos costs $4,200. Subtract that from the gross, and the net profit is still over $10,380 per ton of waste.
Now extrapolate that for an entire community. A medium-sized cooperative that processes just 100 tons of pruning waste a year has the potential to generate a new business line with gross revenues approaching $1.45 million annually.
For a rural farming cooperative, $1.5 million in new revenue is completely life-changing.
It creates a vital cross-subsidy. These cooperatives can use the high-tech profits to fund emergency reserves, purchase crop insurance, or invest in fighting climate-driven agricultural threats, like the coffee rust fungus or the borer beetle.
It effectively insulates these vulnerable farming families from the terrifying, unpredictable volatility of global coffee prices on the New York Stock Exchange.
It's a massive financial shield.
It is the ultimate safety net, and it's woven entirely out of their own waste. This really brings us to the core realization of this deep dive.
Yeah.
We started out talking about quantum processors and urban infrastructure, but this isn't just a story about a cool new battery material. It is the blueprint for a perfect circular economy. We have a Costa Rican invention taking a rotting agricultural liability, physically stopping its harmful methane emissions, and transforming it into a high-tech asset.
Right.
An asset that is currently cooling quantum computers, fortifying city skylines, and safely interfacing with human brain tissue, all while making the rural communities that supply it financially bulletproof.
It forces us to fundamentally redefine our concept of value. It proves that the solutions to some of our most complex technological and environmental bottlenecks don't necessarily require strip mining the earth for new rare metals.
Yeah.
Sometimes the molecular architecture we desperately need has already been engineered by nature. We just needed the ingenuity to recognize it.
So, the next time you take a sip of your morning brew, take a second to look at the cup. Realize that the discarded, chopped-off branches of that very plant might be paving the way for our neuromorphic computing future.
It raises an important question, and it's one I want to leave you with today. If the discarded rotting pruning wood of the coffee plant holds the exact molecular blueprint for quantum cooling and artificial human synapses, what other useless agricultural waste sitting quietly in fields right now is secretly hiding the deep tech solutions of tomorrow?